Sajjan is Canada's Minister of International Development and Minister responsible for the Pacific Economic Development Agency of Canada. And he took part in today's conference on food security here in Berlin. Welcome to DW. Can I ask if you agree with the German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, who is accusing Russia of, and I quote here, using hunger as a weapon and taking the world hostage?
Absolutely, completely agree. Vladimir Putin's war has not only caused needless suffering for the Ukrainian population, but it's now creating famine for the developing world. And just in the last few days, Russia has targeted grain facilities that would be destined to developing countries. So yes, they need to be held accountable, and Vladimir Putin needs to be held accountable for this.
Now, the issue of skyrocketing food prices is worrying many here in Europe, but of course the effects will be felt even more strongly in the global south. What can countries there do, if anything, to prepare themselves?
Sadly, last time I was in Berlin at the G7 meeting, I had an opportunity to travel to some of the African nations and see firsthand the impact on the food security crisis. In Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, they had to cut the rations by 50%. So they're getting 1,000 calories per day right now. This is unacceptable. And so this is why I want to thank Germany for convening us today to discuss how we can come together as nations, how can we work with multilateral organizations, how can we ramp up food production and resiliency on the African continent and plus in the global south. So there's a lot can be done. Our Prime Minister just announced an additional $250 million for the humanitarian crisis. Now we need to come together even more, coordinate our work so that we can help save lives in the global south.
Can you understand the anger that's felt in some African countries, that they have nothing to do with the war in Ukraine, but they're bearing the brunt of the global effects?
Absolutely. I can understand their anger. This is a sole responsibility of Vladimir Putin not allowing the grain to come out from the ports. He is purposely blocking access to food, purposely allowing people to die. And this is wrong, and he needs to be held accountable for this. So we can understand the anger, but one message that we want to send to the global south, that we are obviously rightly focused on the war in Ukraine and supporting Ukraine, but we are not going to forget about the crisis that's also taking place. This is why Canada and many other nations have come together to make sure that we provide immediate support, but also look at a longer-term solution to create long-term sustainability and resiliency on food systems for the African continent.
And yet some African governments are saying, it would be quicker if the sanctions imposed on Russia were lifted and then they could get grain again. What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, this is Vladimir Putin's his own info ops of trying to blame the sanctions. Now, one is there are no sanctions on fertilizer and grain to go out. So that's one thing. This is his way of trying to get sanctions lifted by using and holding the rest of the world hostage when it comes to food security. This is the direct result of the blockade that's on the ports, and we're asking Vladimir Putin to work with the United Nations in a neutral fashion to allow the food to come out so that people don't go hungry.
Now, global food security will also be on the agenda at the G7 summit that's starting on Saturday here in Germany. What concrete decisions do you want to see coming out of that meeting?
What we need to see here is how do we come together, first of all, look at initiatives that we have now. One is Africa and many other nations in the global south already have plans in place on how they can increase agricultural production and to do it in a manner that's actually good for the environment. So we need to support their plans. This is about coordinating our work. Plus, we need to take a look at what are the things that we can do right now. So, for example, 30% of food is wasted because there isn't enough food storage facilities in many nations. We need to fix that. So by just fixing some of those things, we need to create better trade as we, more importantly, increase agriculture production. But one thing we also need to do, we need to do it in a way that's going to have an impact. And by impacting for women entrepreneurship in agriculture will have that positive impact.
Harjit Sajjan, Canada's Minister of International Development. Thank you so much for speaking with DW.
Thank you for having me.